Coming up, a new series highlights the natural beauty of the Great Lakes. A Potawatomi biologist is one of this year's MacArthur Fellows, and the midterm elections are right around the corner. We'll tell you about the special newscast we'll have on November 8th. I am Aaliyah Chavez. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines from the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Arizona State University welcomes 3,500 Indigenous students from Arizona and across the nation. It serves one of the largest populations of Indigenous students among U.S. colleges and universities. We created a sense of place for tribal nations to create futures of their own making through community outreach and research, taught by world-class Indigenous faculty where they see a reflection of themselves and their experiences. Find community at ASU.
This is the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez.
Ku'watsi Hopa. Thank you for joining us. Native Hawaiian advocates are speaking out about new developments affecting their lands and people, calling it a historic victory. Earlier this week, the Department of Interior announced it will now require formal consultation with Native Hawaiian communities. This is the first time a process like this has ever happened in the agency's history. Similar to Native Americans, Native Hawaiians have a special political and trust relationship with the federal government, but there had never been a requirement that said the agency needed to contact Native Hawaiians about their affairs. Secretary Holland said her goal with this new procedure is to strengthen Native Hawaiian sovereignty. Board Chair of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Carmen Hulu Lindsay, said this new process is an important step and looks forward to the work ahead. An Indigenous inmate on death row in California is getting one more chance at parole. Monarch citizen Douglas Stankiewicz is from the Big Sandy Rancheria. He has lived on San Quentin's death row for 44 years. He was convicted of fatally shooting 21-year-old Teresa K. Graybeal in a vacant lot in Fresno. Stankiewicz will now get a resentencing hearing on January 20th of next year, which his legal team hopes will result in his freedom. His lawyers say they will present new information that was not presented during his 1978 trial and 1982 retrial. This is information his lawyers say would have warranted a lesser sentence than death or life in prison without parole. The state has until October 29th to respond to Stankiewicz's petition for a new hearing. Now to New Mexico, where a major electric car maker is partnering with the tribal nation for a second time to open up shop. Tesla has announced it will open a dealership on tribal lands by May 2023. The 35,000 square foot facility will be located at Santa Ana Pueblo. It will act as a sales, service, and delivery center for Tesla. Last year, the company opened its first store on tribal lands in Nambe Pueblo. By partnering with tribes, Tesla is able to avoid a state law that bans direct car sales from a manufacturer to customers. Santa Ana Pueblo Governor Joey Sanchez said his tribe has been working to grow its economy to create careers. He added that a group of tribal citizens will undergo a Tesla training program to be employed at the dealership when it opens. According to the Voting Rights Act, election offices are required to translate voting materials into different languages. That's if more than 10,000 or at least 5% of voters are not proficient in English. Cronkite News reporter Alexia Stanbridge visited tribal nations in Arizona who are working on these efforts.
It says nan mos laukat the mala namtem laukat the malaat.
Maxine Wadsworth is a translator for Arizona's Navajo County. It is one of 15 counties in the state. Her job is to translate voting information into the Hopi language. Many indigenous languages were not originally written, So Wadsworth translates election materials orally. Voters can then listen to these audio translations when they vote.
The screen is now on.
Wadsworth spends hours going through each translation.
Makes it very challenging when you're asked to interpret a document which generally has no place in Hopi language.
In the Hopi language, there aren't single terms for certain roles.
The governor is Itatitskwai Arizona Sis Uvermungwe, who's the leader of the state.
Of all the Native communities here in Arizona, Hopi Nation is one of the few that get their state ballots translated into their native language. 3 of the 22 Native American nations in Arizona have an option to vote in their native language. Verlin Jose, a member of the Tohono O'odham Nation, says he remembers a time when they used to offer oral translation of election information.
They were burnt to CDs and they were given out and placed at public locations so people could pick one up and take it home and play it for grandpa or grandma, whatever.
The translations are no longer offered. Jose says it's unfortunate because he believes community members understand their native language better.
Mainly the elders, mainly the people that live in communities that are remote who are still very fluent, and it's what they speak every day.
And while Jose believes elders would benefit the most, he thinks translations would help voter turnout overall.
Because people will more understand what is actually on the ballot.
In Hopi Nation, the election turnout for the general election was fairly low.
The Hopi Tribal Registrar Karen Shupla says they have better turnout for tribal elections, which are not translated, but have much simpler ballots with only candidate names. State and general elections include propositions, which can be confusing in any language.
What does this proposition mean? What does tax mean? What does, different, whatever the propositions are.
The goal, making it easier for everyone to participate in the electoral process. In any language. In Phoenix, Alexia Stambridge.
And those are the headlines for the ICT Newscast. The prestigious MacArthur Foundation has announced its class of fellows for 2022. One of those fellows is a citizen Potawatomi Nation professor, writer, and scientist. Robin Wall Kimmerer is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. As part of the honor, Kimmerer will also receive $800,000 in award money. Sandra Schulman has this interview.
So you have won one of the winners of the MacArthur Fellowship for this year, which is a very big deal, and you're one of the native winners. You have a bit of an unusual arts background. I don't know, I guess it's an art what you do. So tell us a little bit about how you work with native plants and what you do.
Yeah, I'm a plant ecologist. I'm a professor of botany, and I'm really interested in protection of our cultural plants and what I call biocultural restoration of both protecting our plants, healing the land, and really trying to think about the intersection between culture, traditional knowledge, and Western science, and bringing all those together in order to protect indigenous homelands and landscapes.
So how does that actually translate into action? Do you go to reservations and work with the tribes on this knowledge?
Well, it all depends on the project. I would say that I live here in Haudenosaunee territory. I am citizen Potawatomi, but this is where I'm based. And working here in Haudenosaunee territory, we're working with restoration of cultural plants, like some of the medicines that community is really interested in, and in trying to devise ways to reintroduce those plants to indigenous homelands. We're also really interested in, of course, in rematriation of lands and land justice. Our Center for Native Peoples and the Environment is is dedicated to the work of land justice, of improving and creating more access for Indigenous communities to both public and private lands, for the ability to gather basket plants, medicine plants, etc. So yeah, it has both very tangible on the ground work, as well as work with our students and research in how to think about this and devise these strategies.
I understand you're writing a book and you're going to use some of this funding for time, you said, to write and to think, which is a big part of writing a book, I know. So what will the book be on?
Well, this book is really grounded in a cultural understanding of plants as persons, plants as our teachers, plants as knowledge holders in a way. And so I'm trying to write from an Anishinaabe perspective about some of our most important plants who are storytellers and who appear in so many of our traditional stories, and who are also really important as scientific markers of environmental change. So this book, which I'm so delighted to have more time to really think about and dig into, is grounded in the personhood of one of our cultural icons, Jingwak, the white pine. And I really hope that at the end of this book, the notion of the rights of nature and the personhood and intelligence of nature becomes much easier for the public to grasp through the work of storytelling.
Now, I know that climate change is playing a big part in an issue with tribes, that the native plants are disappearing. I've done interviews, say, even with basket makers, and they can't find the plants that they had always relied on. So how do you play a part in this with helping the tribes?
Yeah. One of my graduate students, Susanna Howard, just finished her master's degree in working on trying to think about what we're calling the Potawatomi Plant Protection Network. It's an idea that we're trying to get off the ground, of thinking about, as climate shifts and our plants in the South in particular need support in migrating to northern climates, and the knowledge of how to use those plants, how to care for those plants, needs to be attached to the plants as well. And so her work is really associated with trying to help plants move and to create a kind of an intertribal corridor for sharing knowledge and sharing plants. It's just at the very beginning stages. Her master's degree work created the maps and the concepts for that. And that's one of the things I would hope to dig into with this MacArthur Award, is to really take these ideas that we've researched and try to make them real on the ground with a network of plant knowledge holders.
Well, it's very important work, and we look forward to the book. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
Another Indigenous person, Sky Hopinka, has also been named a 2022 MacArthur Fellow, and we will bring you an interview with him very soon. We'll be right back. There's a new 3-part documentary series now available for streaming in the U.S. Great Lakes Untamed showcases the natural history of the world's largest and most important watershed. One of the researchers on the show joins us now. Siobhan Toulouse is from the Sagamok Anishinaabe, where she spent her youth in the wetlands. Hi, Siobhan.
Hi, Nelia.
So tell us about your work on Great Lakes Untamed.
It's been an amazing project. I've learned a lot about the Great Lakes, and I've gotten to meet other professionals along the Great Lakes, both Canadian side and American side. It's been an amazing project. I've been on it for about 3 years. I came on as a First Nation researcher, I live in my community, Sagamok, between the Spanish River and Lake Huron. So I've been working with reptiles for a lot of years now, and so I got a message from Ted Oakes about, if I had any stories, and so it all just expanded from there, and I was on the project for about 3 years. And now it's this amazing series that I've gotten to watch with my family when it premiered in Canada. You get to learn a lot about the Great Lakes and some climate change issues affecting the Great Lakes.
This precious drop of fresh water is about to become something greater. It joins a movement, one that will create enormous power, chaos, and beauty. Along its 3,000-kilometer journey, it will nurture and destroy. But as it grows, it shapes the face of a continent. This is the story of the largest watershed on the planet. Wider than the Atlantic Ocean, it holds nearly 1/4 of the Earth's fresh water. A priceless treasure. These are the waters of North America's Great Lakes. A chain of 5 of the world's largest. For 13,000 years, they've served and provided as a home to millions of creatures and the lifeblood of 2 great nations. The Great Lakes aren't just enormous. They're ever-changing, unstoppable. These are the greatest lakes on Earth.
You mentioned working with reptiles for a long time. I understand you actually work at the Toronto Zoo. Maybe tell us about that.
So I worked for the Toronto Zoo for about 2 years. I was on the Blandings Turtle Conservation Project. All our turtles in Ontario are at risk, and Blandings turtles are one of them. They're the most terrestrial turtle. They walk around a lot. And so the Toronto Zoo has the project to reintroduce them to Southern Ontario because their populations are at risk. And so I was on that. I was with other Indigenous women. We were tracking in the wetlands all day using telemetry. I love it so much. And then from there, after working for the zoo on the Turtle Conservation Project, I moved to Magnetawan First Nation, and I got to work with rattlesnakes and some other reptile conservation projects. I've gotten to travel around Ontario meeting other First Nations, Bikejawon and Alderville First Nation. They're all doing really amazing projects to restore their environment and their species at risk.
We only have a short time left here, but I want to go back to this documentary series. For our viewers at home who, maybe want to watch this, what's your message to them as to why they should turn it on and where they can find it, of course?
Okay, so it's going to be on the air dates for the U.S. It's on the Smithsonian Channel at 8 p.m. Episode 3 is on Wednesday at 8, Smithsonian Channel. You get to learn a lot about the Great Lakes. You get to see some amazing cinematography. It's great.
Was there any part about learning about the Great Lakes that surprised you that you didn't know before?
Yeah, lots. I'm so focused on reptiles. I didn't know a lot about water and the way it travels through all the Great Lakes. So, and just a lot of the fascinating species that live along there and the people that are trying to, help the environment.
Well, Siobhan, thank you so much, and we're excited to watch your documentary series.
Thank you. Chimigosh.
The 2022 midterm elections are 2.5 weeks away. ICT and FNX First Nations Experience are proud to share that we will bring you a 3-hour live newscast from an Indigenous perspective. Our newscast will be broadcast from San Bernardino, California, and will be jam-packed with coverage. Joining me now to preview the event is my co-anchor on election night, ICT's editor-at-large, Mark Trahant. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Leah.
So let's just start off and tell us, how this election night project came to be for ICT.
This was planned in 2018, about 6 weeks before the election. We had no idea what we were doing. And we just thought it was an extraordinary election. We knew a lot of really great candidates were out there and thought, you know what, if we don't do this, nobody else will. And so we set out and said, we're going to put together a broadcast. FNX was a great partner, and they immediately said yes. We hired a lot of young people to start us off and put together a 6-hour broadcast, which was probably too much. But we learned a lot from that. And the one thing we really learned is that folks really appreciated having election reporting from an Indigenous perspective. I spoke in northern Minnesota not long after election night, and a young woman came up to me and said, "This is the first time in my life that the news has been for me." And that really struck a chord with me.
Every election night since 2018, I actually should start with 2018 because that was so historic, because that's when, at the time, Deb Haaland and Sharice Davids were elected to Congress, the first 2 Native women who had ever been elected to Congress.
And we kind of saw that coming. And one of the funny stories is you plan election nights. First of all, reporters love election nights. It's the most fun. It's like Christmas. And we planned out a script for 6 hours, and part of that script was to have results coming in different hours of the night. Sharice Davids and Deb Haaland won so fast that the whole show was blown right from the beginning, because we had to say we have 2 Native women winning in Congress. Curious was the 3rd Native woman that would have won that night lost, but then she got elected 2 years later. So it became a pretty extraordinary story.
Yeah, and if we're moving forward to 2020, which you also co-anchored in the 2020 election night, what were the big surprises there, and what stands out to you from 2020?
Well, both 2018 and 2020, the Native vote was very well organized, and the results paid off. And you saw that in lots of places across the country, and I think you'll see that again. This one is going to be interesting on different levels, but I think we're going to have a lot of both surprises and stories that we've kind of come to expect that night.
I want to fast forward to November 8th, because we cannot understate how important this election is for Indian country, specifically for Indigenous members of Congress. For our viewers at home who don't follow this news all day, every day like we do, maybe talk about the context and the perspective that we're bringing.
Sure. I mean, we've had a record number of Native Americans in Congress for the last 2 sessions, and this one promises to do that again, potentially. I think the most fascinating race, and shows kind of the structural issues with elections in the United States, is Potawatomi in Alaska. And it showed how that if you look at the broad width of an election rather than just a narrow political base, that voters have something else to say than the normal story. And she represents Alaska deeply, but she also represents Alaska Native communities in a historic way.
I want to talk about Oklahoma, because Oklahoma is going to be a state that we're talking about so often on November 8th. Tell our viewers about that.
Sure. Well, the big one there is that we have not had a United States Senator since Ben Nighthorse Campbell, who famously went from the Democrats to the Republicans in the middle of his term. Mark Wayne Mullen is running for the U.S. Senate, and given that Oklahoma is about as deep in red as you can get, it's likely he'll win that seat.
The other folks who stand out to me, of course, are Congresswoman Sharice Davids from Kansas, who's up for re-election. We're going to be watching that very closely. In New Mexico, we have another Congresswoman, Yvette Harrell, who's also up for re-election. I believe every single member of Congress is up for re-election or is resigning after this.
Right. And both New Mexico and Kansas, it's interesting because redistricting played a role. In Kansas, Sharice may have outmaneuvered the redistricting folks, and early on it was looking like she was in trouble, and now the polls give her a lot more weight than they thought. And the opposite so far has happened in New Mexico, where the redistricting kind of went after Representative Yvette Harrell and added a lot of Democrats to the pile, and it's looking like that might be more successful.
And the other part that we should also watch and mention is that there are some new candidates who have a chance to be elected to Congress for the first time. I'm thinking of Wyoming with Lynette Grable, who's running for Congress there, and also North Carolina, Charles Graham is running for Congress. So, we're going to have a lot to cover on November 8th.
And the thing about Lynette Grable that I think is so wonderful is that if you look at the pattern of folks who are successful, many of them lost their first time out, their second time out, their third time out, and they just stuck to it. And this is her story.
Absolutely. Well, we didn't even get a chance to talk about what's going to be in the show. For our viewers at home, they should tune in because we're going to have correspondents based all over the country. We're going to have some great pre-produced packages who are giving people a really in-depth look at these candidates that we're just mentioning. And we're even going to have some watch parties. So I'm really excited, Mark, but unfortunately we've run out of time today. Thank you so much for being here. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.